Let's have some fun.
You know what is fun? I was reading about this the other day, and I just fucking love it. Is earmarks of empires as they progress, peak, and decline. Roman Empire is a great example, just perfect. There's the the pioneering sort of stage, and then you have the you go through the cities forming, and then you go through commerce stage, and then you go through a warring stage, and then you go through a decadence stage. The last stage of all empires is decadence. And when they reach this certain level of separation of rich and poor and all this isn't America at all that I'm talking about. This is like, you could see it even in present day in Russia. When Russia went under, it was the same thing. It was a falling of an empire, and they too went through the same phases of progression and decline that the Roman Empire went through. And it ended in decadence, and it always does, because that's what humans eventually strive for, is their own self-pleasure. Great frickin' article, though. It was a great frickin', it was just beautiful, because it nailed it dead to the money and brought to light stuff like what people do today in the United States. And there were so many parallels. It was like a beautiful thing. I love that kind of shit. Sheepdog gave me this book called Don't Know Much About History, which is just one. Have you read that?
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Kenneth. Oh, it's right on the tip of my mind. Wonderful book. But really gets to the points that you don't learn in the 6th grade or 7th grade, 8th grade history books at Brown County High School. It was like, this is
glad
so
to
cool.
discuss that book, because there's a good 10% of it that's bullshit.
Oh, they're out as all.
But then and he draws conclusions from that and enlarges upon that, and that's not atypical. And
that's actually how a lot of history books were written.
I'm looking for that. Read stuff. So
and you look at what they've got.
But the whole thing about empires is interesting, because there's been a lot of come and go empires on the planet.
Oh, you bet.
The largest empire, as far as ground is concerned, was controlled by Genghis Khan. And he actually made the largest empire on the planet so
Which
far.
was one of the reasons that he put in his mess kit, was because he got real big real fast.
No, he actually did wonderfully, and they took over China. But the problem was...
But that reign was how long?
This is what agrees with what you're saying, at least in the Mongol Chinese example, is that by the time you got, the Genghis Khan was a steppe nomad culture. It came from that kind of culture, a horse culture. And, they took over the Chinese, one of the largest agrarian cultures at the time. And so when they took that over, rather than, adapt to the Mongol ways, which were a little more primitive, they became more and more Chinese-like.
Exactly.
And by the time you got to Kublai Khan,
there was assimilation involved.
He was almost just like the Chinese.
Yeah.
And he was so decadent.
Yeah.
And, in the palaces they made, the things, he was so far removed from the yurt kind of consciousness, nomadic consciousness that the Mongols started off with.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is part of the Mongols and every culture around them, out in the steppes out there, in Mongolia, in that area.
But because that's the way you live.
That's how they lived.
Yeah, that's in that countryside. That's how
and they had this forest culture, yurt culture. They moved, with the seasons and all that.
You have to be able to break
stuff.
your house down and
totally different. And then,
go to the dollar store.
They got really super, super corrupt.
And that's one of the things that, as I was reading about it,
you can almost say that about the Greeks.
Corruption and decadence are end earmarks for empires.
The Greeks didn't necessarily control a lot of property, but they did do what they called the Hellenization of the Mediterranean. They did send out a lot of colonies. Incredible amount of Greek colonies went out. But the interesting thing about it, the Greeks went from a republic, which is, the kind of thing we talk about as a democracy, but you had to be a white male citizen of Athens.
It was there was very narrow parameters of definition
this was actually,
there.
Not all the Greek cities or Greek city-states had this. Athens had this. But it was democratic in that their main foe, Xerxes and Darius, those guys were, the heads of empires as kings and, godlike emperors. Okay, where the Greeks at that time, were kind of like a republic. Well, then they moved into an oligarchy,
like a republic.
which is like, several dozen guys or a dozen or less, whatever, small amount of guys controlling
With
things.
all the money.
Then they went from an oligarchy to a dictatorship.
That's where it usually
And
heads
that's
out.
where Caesar, one of the reasons they killed Caesar is because, the guy was becoming this dictator. And then after that, they got into the emperor consciousness, and the emperor being semi-divine.
Yeah.
And luxurious
Korea.
in its lifestyle. Yeah, I mean, so it did kind of evolve.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot of them
into
that
this-
hit that 200-year
So the
mark.
Greeks did the same thing. I mean, that's interesting.
A good portion of them hit the 200-year mark, 250-year mark. Some of them, obviously, were
Yeah, you can't say that about everybody.
long.